Hey guys, hope you're all doing well, and a ton of you have been asking me on my thoughts on NZXT's H200. I understand it's been out for quite some time now, but I figured I'd still like to share my thoughts and my own testing, seeing as it is still a very relevant and popular ITX case. So today we're going to look at size comparisons, hardware layouts, and thermal performance versus several other ITX options. So as a bit of an introduction, the NZXT H200 is the smallest case made by NZXT and is part of their H series lineup. It's an ITX case with a total volume of 26.1 liters and can be had for $89 US in a few different color options. For that amount of money, you're actually getting some pretty decent value when it comes to build quality. It is just steel, but overall it does feel very strong and premium. You do get a nice large tempered glass side panel to showcase all of your hardware on the interior, and this is an important design feature to note here also, as smaller ITX cases typically have ventilated panels instead. We do have some ventilation here too, mostly around the front panel. It's definitely nothing crazy like you'll see with the Meshify C or anything like that, but it is a nice compromise in my opinion between design and airflow. You've also got some ventilation on the power supply shroud as well. However, this will mostly be blocked if you are using an ATX power supply. Certainly though, some ventilation is better than none, so a good design choice here by NZXT. You've also got an interior bracket, which is one of the trademark features for the H series cases, and it's glad to see it a bit more reserved on this smaller interior. It wraps nicely around your graphics card, hides cable routing behind the motherboard, and you can use it to mount reservoirs here for your custom loops too. So the main criticism that this case has received since release is that it isn't a true ITX case, given how large it is. Now you guys know that I love space optimized enclosures, so you'd probably guess that I would be of the same mindset. However, despite the H200 being both an ITX case and above 20 liters, I do believe that it fills a necessary gap in the market. But before we get into that discussion, let's take a look at some side-by-side comparisons of some other ITX cases that I've got on hand. So from smallest to largest, we have the recently reviewed Skyreach 4 Mini, the soon-to-be reviewed Sentry 2.0, the DNA 4, Ghost S1, NKSEM 1, Streacom DA2, and finally the NZXT H200. So for a case to be blessed with the SFF stamp of approval, it does need to be under 20 liters in total volume, so of course then the H200 isn't an SFF case. To be fair though, I wouldn't exactly call it enormous. It is noticeably larger than even the 17.5 litre Streacom DA2, but at the same time, hardware compatibility and configuration options are much superior as well. Here's another side-by-side comparison, but this time against NZXT's own H500, a relatively compact ATX mid-tower that comes in at 41.3 litres of volume, and despite the H500 being slightly longer and a bit taller, both have a width of 210mm. This means that for air cooling, both of these cases can accommodate air coolers up to 165mm in height. So let's say you want to run some seriously large air coolers from Be Quiet or Noctua, but you don't need an ATX system, the H200 does make that possible. Okay, so let's take a look at a few different configuration options in the H200 that aren't possible in smaller ITX cases. Starting off with our fully air-cooled build, and one which allows for an extremely powerful CPU tower cooler, two 120mm exhaust fans towards the back of the case, and two 140mm intake fans at the front. The cooler that we're using is the Be Quiet Darkrock 4, which comes in at 160mm in height, only with a single fan, but do note that the H200 can accommodate Noctua's Monster NH-D15 cooler. That's a configuration I'd love to test out eventually. You can also run a push-pull radiator configuration in the H200 at the front of the case, as you've got a total of 85mm of clearance in the PSU shroud cut out for radiators and fans. Of course though, any radiator or fan added towards the front of the case will subtract from graphics card clearance. For maximum graphics card length, you've got 325mm without any fans or radiators at the front, 270mm of clearance with a common AIO installed, and 245mm when using a standard radiator in push-pull. I feel like the most popular configuration will no doubt be a standard front-mounted AIO, so in this case just make sure your graphics card is shorter than 270mm. Another powerful configuration would be a dual AIO setup for the CPU and GPU. You'll just need to make sure that the pump block on your CPU isn't too tall. For example, when using the Kraken AIO, you won't be able to fit a 120mm radiator at the rear. Also, graphics cards up to 2 slots are of course supported, which is standard. If it's slightly above that, it might be able to squeeze in there, but 2.5 slot cards definitely do not fit. Some other specs worth noting: we do have support for ATX power supplies here, but an SFX bracket is included by default if that's what you plan on going with instead. For storage, 2 2.5-inch drives can be mounted behind the motherboard tray, another one on the side of the power supply shroud, and a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive can be mounted on the floor of the case in front of the PSU. I/O is fairly standard: 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports and your standard headphone and mic jacks. Also, I almost forgot, you can use their magnetic puck as a convenient headphone hanger too. Okay, so let's finally talk about thermals in the H200, and the test system that I'm using here is the same that I've always used for ITX cases to keep things consistent. The only thing that changes between the cases is the CPU cooler, as we are testing the cooling potential of each case, not just airflow. In this case, we are testing with the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 and the NZXT Kraken X52. Lastly, the system consists of a delidded 8700K, a 1080 Ti SC2, 16GB of 3200MHz memory, and a Z370i motherboard. So starting off with CPU thermals, and since we are using both quite powerful CPU coolers, we do end up on the upper end of the stack. Taking a look at the water-cooled configuration first, we can compare how the exact same system and cooler does in other smaller cases like the NCase M1 and the Ghost S1. The Ghost S1 is slightly warmer than the H200, mostly because the radiator fans have to pull air through the entire case on their own, and exhausting that air is not assisted like it is in the H200. The NCase M1 though does demonstrate better airflow performance when compared to the larger NZXT H200, as when paired with the same amount of fans, it's a lot more effective in displacing that hot air inside the case due to its lower volume. The NZXT H200 does have the step up when it comes to air cooling though, and I saw the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 significantly cooler than any other air-cooled configuration in the stack. Keep in mind that you can mount even larger coolers in the H200 like we mentioned previously, and this is something that I'm looking forward to testing down the road. Onto GPU thermals now, and here we have the 1080 Ti sitting at 72 degrees C in the H200, towards the warmer end of the stack when compared to other ITX cases. For reference, on an open test bench, this card will sit at around 64 degrees C with the fan speed on auto. The warmer result is likely due to the ATX power supply being used in the H200 and blocking potential airflow which would otherwise be pulled through that ventilated power supply shroud. Okay, so what do we think of the NZXT H200? Well, it's far from a small form factor case. At 26.1 liters, it's not going to fit in your carry-on luggage, and lugging it to LAN parties is not going to be as easy as other ITX options. Having said that, for a desktop system, I have no problem recommending the NZXT H200 for those who want to build an ITX system and aren't concerned too much about space optimization like myself. So yes, it is much larger than the majority of ITX cases, but with that there are a few benefits. The support for larger tower air coolers is an important one, support for 4 drive slots is another, and a dual AIO configuration like I mentioned earlier could be something that's quite interesting. So in closing, if you are looking to build an ITX system, I would always suggest looking at the more space optimized enclosures first, like the NCase M1, the Dan E4, or even more affordable alternatives like the Node 202 or the SG13, which are still a lot more compact with what you'll get with the H200. After all, that is the point of building an ITX system in the first place, it's to build compact. Having said that, if you don't mind a larger tower, but you don't exactly want to build in a micro ATX or an ATX tower, the NZXT H200 certainly fits that gap between the really space optimized enclosures and, the real general common micro ATX and ATX towers. It is quite a nice looking case, and it's really forgiving when it comes to hardware configurations as well. I will drop some links in the description if you want to pick one up. As always guys, a huge thanks for watching, consider subscribing down below if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.